So, tēnā koutou katoa, ko parihaka te maunga, ko hātia te awa, he uri aho no tāwhiti, ko rangatane te waka, ko Ngāti Pākehā te iwi, ko whangarei, Glenshee te marae, ko Amanda Lees toko ingoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. So in my introduction, I'm very conscious that, to tell you all that I was born in Whangarei, up in Northland, so I have a personal connection to Whangarei, to the mountain, to the river, to the town, but I don't have an ancestral or historic connection. So just sort of making that clear, my ancestors come from Scotland, and so, sort of in this identity sort of query about, where is my place in the world? So here I am, this little baby, leaning with my family on the rails of Mount Parihaka, looking out over the city, and then 50 odd years later, here's my own 3 children, born and raised in Scotland, returning to live in New Zealand, back leaning on that same rail, looking over the city of Whangarei, of the city where their mother was born. So I think, we all come to the learning environment with a history, an identity, a sort of an ancestral pathway. And I think that's really important to acknowledge. So I asked lots of people for advice about this session, and I said to one person, I'm doing this conference thing, have you got any advice? And he said, for God's sake, don't ask them to do anything. When you go to a conference, you just want to sit and not do. And then he sort of stopped and he said, oh, I can tell by the look on your face that you're going to be asking them to do something. So I'm already feeling like I'm running short of time, but I really want you just to spend maybe 1 minute with someone close by you, thinking and chatting about what's one thing that connects me and my history to you, something that you have in common with me. And then think about what's one thing that makes you and your history and your ancestry different to mine. I'm timing you because we're short of time. I'm going to try Stuart's trick of putting your hand up. I don't think I have quite the pull of him because it's not working as well. So thanks. So I think that the idea is that to make connections, we start off with thinking about things that we have in common. And that's the way that we connect. But I think that we also need to recognise that we start to learn when we start recognising the differences between us. So just bearing that in mind as we go through the sort of examples of the things that we're going to look at. So the idea that all learning starts with a connection. So it might be a neural connection. It might be a connection with yourself. So trying to work out, who am I as a learner, as a member of society. It also might be about your connection, your identity, how you connect with other people. And I think if we can acknowledge this idea around connections, then it's a way to develop a respect for one another, which is sort of the foundation of how we then can work together and learn from one another. So this session is not about whistles and bells. We've had lots of interesting sessions where people have shown their real expertise and skill around technology. I don't really have that. I find instructions really difficult to follow. I get really stuck. I call IT a lot and they'll say things like, have you tried turning your computer off? And I'll say, well, why would I have wanted to do that? I've also had IT say to me, is there someone else in your office we could talk with? But I'm curious, I'm willing to learn, and I sort of, like a bit of a dog with a bone, I get an idea and I think I'm going to keep going with this because I want to see where it goes. So for some of you, some of my examples might actually be quite underwhelming, but I'm trying to find little tiny things that I've done that actually I think probably, hopefully make a difference to the students that I work with. Hopefully you can connect in some small way. So when I was thinking about how to structure this, and it started off as quite unwieldy, I thought about the sort of theoretical frameworks and pedagogies that I try and build into my teaching. So I first was reminded of Thomas Reeves, who was actually one of the keynotes here last year. He says, you know, we sort of get hung up on the thing, on the technology, but let's focus on the problem. Like, what are we trying to use technology to do? So I thought, okay, what are the problems that I face in my teaching? Then I was thinking about, okay, this idea about pedagogy, about this sort of continuum from pedagogy, andragogy, heutagogy. Where am I on that, and the sort of the journey that I'm taking to try and shift myself and my students sort of along a little bit at a time. The other theory that I'm quite connected to is this idea about connectivism, which sort of has these four main principles of autonomy, diversity, openness, and connectedness. So I thought as a way to sort of frame this session, I would choose just one of those principles, which I think sort of has relevance for me, and I hope for you, is around connectedness. So I'm thinking about three sets of examples, all related to how do we connect. First, we're going to look at the problem is how do we value people's identity? How do we value diverse voices? And then how do we value this thing that I've called sort of like a learning kinship? So first, a little bit of context. As Mark said, I teach ethics. It's my sort of main business. I teach ethics within a health faculty. Most of my students are in their last semester. They're out in the hospital setting, they're out doing exciting things. The prospect of a compulsory ethics paper is just sort of not very appealing. It's taught completely online because I have about 10 different disciplines and they're all everywhere, and so for logistical purposes the decision was made that it would be online. The philosophy of the type of ethics is around values-based decision-making. So again, it's mirroring those similar principles about openness, valuing diversity. I guess students studying ethics have a lot of rules and laws and codes that they can draw upon. But what I'm trying to do is sort of help them develop skills for those grey areas where there's no book of best practice, where they're going to have to use their critical thinking skills to actually rationalise what am I going to do in this situation. I also teach on a little tiny paper, so the ethics has about 350 online students a year. Also teach on a tiny paper, media and communications in the health faculty. Has about 10 students, so it's in that paper that we do lots of really exciting student-determined learning just because of the numbers. The other paper, so I'm going to mix my sort of examples and I'll try and flag which paper I'm talking about. Okay, first thing about connectedness, my first problem, how do I value people's individual identity? So I was thinking about people have all sorts of identities, and my paper is actually called Professional Practice and Ethics. So somewhere along the line, I think I'm tasked with trying to facilitate the students to develop a professional identity. So the first problem I sort of call the assessment practice gap. In our faculty, our students, they read a bit, they listen a bit, and they write a lot. The reality of their practice is that they're going to listen a lot, they're going to talk a lot. I hope that they're going to listen more than they talk, and they're going to write a little bit. So there's sort of a bit of a mismatch. We get them to do all this writing. So my students in ethics have a portfolio, so it's really easy. I can just slot out a little bit of writing and add in a different sort of assessment. So I gave them an audio assessment. I said, here's a radio interview, listen to it, here's an ethical question, provide an audio response. Give them agency, use whatever tool you like. All you need to do, I don't need to know what it is, just upload your file. Couldn't do that. Too difficult. It's so complicated. I have to learn how to make a recording. Waste of my study time. Okay, so I thought, okay, maybe I need maybe too much freedom. So for some, remember they'd rather be in the hospital. They don't want to really be with me. So let's see how I can sort of change things. So I did a bit of a realist evaluation. People called Storr and Adawi, and they say, don't just say, is it working? Say, who's it, how and who is it working for, in what situation? So I think, well, this is working for some people, it's not working for others. Let me see how I can make some little changes. So I said, right, I'll use Blackboard. And the students like that because they know the structure of it. So I was recognising I needed to sort of be a bit more controlling. And it was easy. The positives was that we had the Blackboard team on site. They could offer support. Everyone was using the same tool, so there was some sort of sense of equity among the students. The downside was it is just off-the-shelf tool, and so it did some things that I just wasn't happy about. I would make audio feedback, and as soon as I made the feedback, it would get sent out to the student. But I wanted to hold all the feedback together and then send it all out when I'd done it all, and it couldn't do that. It couldn't load. I had too many students for it to load quickly, and I'd be at home sort of twiddling my thumbs, waiting for it to sort of load all this data. But made some progress. Students were a little bit happier. They saw the relevance. This is practical, this is interesting. I like this. But, new problem, if I'm going to give them the tool, if I'm going to say, I've got control, this is the tool you're going to use, I have to make sure that students can actually know how to use the tool. So I thought, okay, I need just a little quick exercise near the start of the semester where I can feel confident that they have used the tool before they use it in an assessment, so that then they're not anxious and so that then they're not worried that they're being assessed on how well they can use the tool over and above what they're being assessed on. So I thought, couldn't really think of anything. I know, I'll just get them to say a salutation, their name and what program. And it sort of just came out of the top of my head. And actually, the plus of that is that now I have access to all my students, how they like to say hello, what their preferred name is, and how they say it. So now when I give audio feedback, I just have the initial file open, and I can say, Bulavanaka, Amanda, thanks for your assignment. And I think that very small thing in a class where students are feeling that physical disconnection because they're out on placement just might form one sort of way of them to feel that their identity is being sort of at least acknowledged. On Twitter last week, someone said, I just discovered this university where they allow students to record and pronounce their names. Think about it. It might be something that you can think of, or you might already be doing it. Okay, but what about the identity of the lecturer? So again, whether it's in an online setting or in the classroom, we want to be able to have opportunities to show students, who we are. So we just did a little fun masquerade, 30-second sort of hello, and the students, they like it. How cool is that? Doing fun things like this help relate to you and help us feel comfortable. So that was sort of just a little thing that we were able to do to help sort of share our identity. The other thing, sorry for multiple postings of me, but the other thing is about how do we help our students identify with the world outside the classroom. So I want my students to be thinking about ethics in the hospital, but I also want them to be thinking about ethics in sort of a lifelong learning that learning takes place everywhere. So every week I just do a little video on a Monday. It's just 2 or 3 minutes high, like a trailer. You know, you won't believe what's going to happen this week in class. But I always do it outside. I never do it in my office because I want just that glimmer of hope that they'll recognise that learning takes place everywhere, not just in the classroom. I never edit it. It's just a one take. If I was in class and I was saying, hi, this is what we're doing this week, it would be the same thing. If I made a mistake, I'd just have to deal with it. So I want the students to see the sort of authenticity and my willingness to sort of be vulnerable. Okay, next set of examples. We've hopefully developed some ways of recognising and valuing people's identity. So the next problem is, how do we acknowledge people's diverse views? So how do we allow people to feel that they can trust the environment? So we talked, I think Mark from Blackboard talked yesterday about the universal design for learning, how there's particular tools that we can use to address students with, particularly who have identified learning challenges that they face. But there's another set of students too, the ones that have a quiet voice, the ones who have been embarrassed in the past about speaking up in class, the ones that are the deep, slow thinkers who only think of what to say at lunch, 3 hours after the class had finished. So I think technology actually provides us with some opportunities to give everyone a voice, and whether you're teaching online or in the classroom. The thing about ethics is that it's the person with the minority view that's the most important person in the class, because they are going to be the person who triggers the most thinking for us. And if we're going to be trying to solve wicked problems in the world, we actually need to hear the perspectives of everybody. So, one small way, this is using a piece of software called the Values Exchange. It's an ethical decision-making framework. There's a free version, there's a licensed version. We just start with low-level, low-risk things. Is it okay to wear pyjamas in public? Should hide and seek be an Olympic sport? Should we allow people to chop off healthy limbs and have prosthetics if that means that they can be a better athlete? So none of these questions have right or wrong answers. The student considers the little scenario independently. They can take as long as they like to work through. They click submit, and as soon as they submit, they get to see the thinking of everybody else. So it allows all views to have equal sort of amplification. No one's got a loud voice because everyone has equal access. It then provides confidence so that when we then go on to look at very serious, sensitive issues, then the students have built some confidence and some sort of comfortableness with the situation. Okay, feel less judgmental. Actually, we were sharing quite in-depth values, and that was quite an amazing experience for some of them. If we think about ourselves as lecturers, though, we're often, well, maybe not often, but sometimes we are working alongside other colleagues that may have very diverse views. So this is Laurent Antonchak on the left. So he's from Creative Technologies. I was from Health Science. We came together to deliver this media paper. So we came from very different paradigms in terms of art and science, and one of the main differences was this sort of difference between process and product. And so we went through this sort of 3-year phase of working together, starting off not really understanding each other, but puzzled, but then sort of eventually working through and working together. So one of the ways that we worked together and respected and learned about each other was through a practitioner blog. So every week for 3 years we kept a blog, the two of us, where we both contributed, reflecting on how the class had gone, how we might do things differently, challenges that we faced. So it was an opportunity for sort of reflective practice, but also it was an opportunity to feel vulnerable and to build trust with one another. So whether it was students or staff, I think we all sort of got to the point where we're sort of trying to sort of, be part of one another's learning. Okay, last section, last group. So just to recap, we've looked at ways to help develop people's identity. We've looked at ways of trying to allow diverse views to be heard. So now we're well positioned to think about how we're going to learn with, about and from others. And I've sort of thought about what that meant to me, linking it back to sort of the some around the pepeha and what that's about kinship and connections. And I thought, well, what we're trying to do, what the problem is how do we value this sort of learning kinship, this ability for us to learn with and from others. So, last few examples, just look at some ways how we have learnt collaboratively. So, this is probably very underwhelming compared to the Point England children. But so little simple things. A Google community, when that was sunsetted, we moved over to MeWe. I don't know if other people are familiar with that, but it works pretty much the same as Google Communities. So it's very collaborative. Students all have access to provide resources, to share resources. It's all transparent. All their blogs, all their project work is available for others to learn from. One of the big differences for these students was this refocus and to sort of look at process, not product. And so the students really valued the idea that you don't just work and hide your work away and work secretly, and then at the end of the semester you hand your work over to the teacher who marks it and sort of secretly hands it back. So this process was that you do everything transparently, and every 3 weeks you have a presentation and you show your colleagues, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm thinking about, this is what my challenges are, and you get feedback. And as the person says, after a while you actually start creating something that's half decent. But this was a very different model of learning for the majority of our students. But they appreciated this sort of what they refer to as this horizontal approach, this ability to sort of learn with and from each other. And they also learned to model quite good feedback. So that sort of ticks all the boxes for a nice sort of sandwiched feedback. It was good, you liked your links to theory, could have done a bit more with the images, overall quite good. So they were, we had a learning outcome that required students to work collaboratively, which in part related to supporting their peers with feedback. Okay, another way that we develop this sort of kinship is that I try and participate in as many things as I can that my students do. So one of my jobs tomorrow is to load a survey for my students, and I'll probably use this question again. So you're walking out of this lecture, you see a $50 note in the bush outside, what do you do? So again, low level question, there's no right and wrong answer, although many people think there is. Do you hand it to the police? Do you take it to the reception? Do you keep it? And I'm just honest to say I'll take the money for myself because I used to say I would hand it in, but then I found some money one day and I kept it and I never thought anything of it. And I thought, and I was mortified, but I thought I'm just going to tell the students. So I say, I struggle, and this is why, because this happened to me. And I hope that it helps students see that there's no right answer. It's okay to be honest. Another way is that I try and help sort of bring topics alive by having students help contribute to the data and the literature that we'll use. So this is for an issue in week 10. We're going to look at justice in the health system. So we'll look at philosophers, we'll look at theories, we'll look at literature, and all that will say justice is a dodgy thing. We can't quite define what fairness might mean. So I made a survey and the students say what they think justice might be and how it relates to about 10 or 12 different sort of scenarios. So we build that in, I sort of collate it and build it into the lecture material so they can feel there's a part of me in the material for that week. It also models the sort of research element of this tool so that in later assessments, students can actually do their own data analysis of a topic of their choice. Okay, so yeah, they seem to enjoy the opportunity to sort of see the thinking of their peers. Feedback's on a continuum though. Some people are very happy. They want every human to study this. But others love the capitals, don't have time, got to do this, got to do that, got to do this, got to do that. It just needs to be easy. I think, well, as long as I feel like I'm continually welcoming my students and supporting them, I'm okay with that sort of feedback, because I think we do need to support our students to feel that uncomfortableness with having to deal with things that they might not want to deal with. Yeah, love the second one. Yeah. Yeah, I was very depressed for a few days, but now I think it's funny. Okay, but the whole idea about testing and trying and being a bit embarrassed about things and everything can be a little bit isolating. I think if anyone knows a little bit about philosophy or ancient people, if anyone knows Sisyphus, the poor guy who rolled the boulder up the hill every day and every day had to start again, and it sort of feels a little bit like that sometimes. But again, the blog was a way to sort of help with that. The blog was augmented with a face-to-face community of practice with Tom Cochrane at the back, so acknowledging Tom. So as well as our blog, every week we'd meet face-to-face, we'd reflect, usually try out some tool that he wanted us to try, but that would be then something that we could then take and try out in the classroom. So here we are, this kinship of learners, actually literally writing an article. So this was a novel experience for me. We actually, one screen, Google Doc, 3 of us on devices, actually writing an article all at the same time. So just a really sort of easy example, but of a way that we sort of worked together and collaboratively. So, where to now? The hills of Glenshee. So I think I'm just carrying on. I'm going back to VoiceThread. I'm sort of committed to get this audio thing refined even more. I'm happy to help my colleagues who are perhaps even more reticent to try things that than they need to be, and also getting involved in things like the sandpit sessions for a new vendor for a new LMS. So just trying to get involved in things. So I guess my take-home points are, always be a learner, practice shamelessly. Don't worry. Just be yourself. Be vulnerable. Make people feel welcome. Always think, am I making my students feel welcome? And if I am, then I can afford to make them feel a little bit uncomfortable. Look at my terrible examples. So this is one from from the Mossel Mount page. I don't know what I was doing, but it was scribbled. I couldn't get it. I remember thinking, I can't get this to go the right way. I'm going to load it anyway. I don't care. But 4,600 people have looked at it. Here, Tom taught me Google Street View. This was my first ever attempt. There's no full bodies. This person has no head. It's terrible, but it's had over 205,000 people look at it. And I think, just give things a go, put it out there in the ether. If I've done nothing, I've made 209 people think that their technology skills are fantastic. So, I guess the last word goes to Tom, who way back in 2015 said, I'm on my way to becoming a digital ninja. It's a work in progress.